Recorded.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Bud Hicks, and we are going to call this meeting to order of the TRPA Forest Health and Wildfire Committee. The date is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023. It is 10 minutes after 10, more or less. Our first item on the agenda is roll call. Maria?
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Here.
Mr. Hicks,
Here.
Mr. Bass,
Here.
Ms. Lane,
Here.
Mr. Rice,
Here.
Ms. Williamson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I will now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov under the quote calendar header. Click on quote governing board hybrid meeting for February 22, 2023. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address the committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking raise hand at the bottom of the screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you may dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, you can also raise your hand in Zoom. You will find the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or have sidebar conversations. Please, everybody, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I would also like to ask all remote members to turn on their cameras if they are able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment, and you will be called to the front to speak. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment or speak directly and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. Our next item on the agenda is approval. Our next item of approval is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
And we can call this orally. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? We will deem the agenda approved as posted. Thank you. We are now on agenda item number 2, approval of the minutes. We have a set of the minutes from the November 16, 2022 at page 23 of the materials. Does any member of the committee wish to make a change? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor?
So moved.
All those in favor, say
Aye.
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 Any objections? Motion
No,
passes.
this is I'll abstain because I wasn't present.
What was that comment?
This
I
is
think that-
Commissioner Bass. I will abstain because I wasn't present.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bass. We are now on agenda item number 3, election of vice chair. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in the Zoom webinar to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. At this point, I would call on the committee members to see if they have any questions, comments, and nominations.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, I would
Ellie?
like to nominate Ms. Conrad Seda to be vice chair of this committee.
All right, before we commence to a public vote on that, are there any other nominations or comments by members of the committee? If not, we will go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. I see no hands raised here. Maria?
Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment on this item.
Okay, and I see no one approaching the podium here in the room. Therefore, we'll close public comment on this particular item. Any further comments on the committee on this item? If not, let's take a vote. Again, may we do an oral vote on this, John? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion passes. That brings us to agenda item number 4, possible recommendation on lifting the prohibition on accepting applications under code section 65.1.6F for an application for a small on-site biofuel unit at the South Tahoe Refuge Site in South Tahoe, California. Information on this item may be found at page 109 of your packet of materials. At this time, I'd like to pass this item on to Kat McIntyre and a representative of Wisewood Energy. And Kat, would you please take it?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members, for having us. As mentioned, my name is Kat McIntyre. I'm the Forest Health Program Manager with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. We have Megan Hartman from Wisewood Energy online. She'll be presenting half of this with me. And then I also have Jacob Stock from our long range planning team to field any planning questions. And I do want to note that we have South Tahoe Refuse representatives in the audience as well. Next slide, please. So an overview of what we will be presenting on today. I'm going to hit on the history and background. Specifically, many of you will remember that in November 2022, we came to the Forest Health and Wildfire Committee to do an informational presentation on this item, and we are coming back for a more formalized recommendation this time. So the presentation is almost identical to what you saw in November, and this is really just to do that formal recommendation piece. I will talk about the environmental and social context, and then I'm going to hand it over to Megan, who will discuss the proposed project and the environmental health and safety compatibility report. And then we will highlight next steps and go to recommendation from the committee. Next slide, please. So I want to lay out the environmental context of what we're dealing with today. As we know, forests are at risk for a variety of reasons. There has been a century of fire suppression, not only in the basin, but in the Western United States, and commercial harvesting up until recently has targeted the largest trees, leaving a homogeneous, dense, and overstocked forest in much of the West. This forest really lacks resilience to survive any kind of natural disturbance, such as insects and disease and drought, and this is all exacerbated by impacts from climate change. The figure that you see on the right is just showing the difference between a healthy and an unhealthy forest. On the bottom, you see that overstocked forest, lots of ladder fuels, lots of surface fuels, ripe for crown fire and catastrophic wildfire. Next slide, please. So about the history of biomass in the basin. In 2010, there was a proposed 2 megawatt commercial size biomass facility at Kings Beach. This was a project that was proposed by NV Energy, and immediately concerns were raised over air quality, noise, traffic, and proximity to community services. This project was specifically quite close to a school and a Boys and Girls Club. So in 2012, during the regional plan update with TRPA, there was a suspension of applications that was inserted into our code language. Next slide, please. So this is what our current code language looks like regarding biomass and biofuel utilization in the basin. It's 65.1.f under biofuel facilities. TRPA shall suspend acceptance of applications for biofuel facilities until further research demonstrates the safety and environmental compatibility of such facilities. And then when you look at what the definition of biofuel facilities is, it states that facilities that combust or gasify forest and or other plant materials in a manner that, in combination with other systems, generates electrical energy for use or distribution, or generates heat for distribution within a building or facility. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be handing it off to Megan Hartman from Wisewood Energy. I believe Megan is online. Is it possible
Hi.
for her to come on camera and unmute?
I am here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks, Kat, for that introduction, and thanks everybody who is there in the room and online for taking the time to hear about this project again. As Kat said, my name is Megan Hartman. I'm the Director of Business Development for Wisewood Energy, and we've been supporting STR in investigating this opportunity and working with many other folks in the community to look at this project. Next slide, please. So, and actually one more, I missed an animation there. Thank you. Whenever we talk about wood energy technology and applications, I like to frame the conversation in different scales of wood energy technologies, because there's quite a range of applications depending on what energy is desired and how it's going to be used. So biomass energy can be used to produce heat only, thermal energy, or electricity, or combined heat and power, or CHP. And that can be at very small scales or very large scales. You can see on the top part of this arrow is the heat side. So that can be very small, like heating a small commercial building or residential facility with a boiler. Can be a bit larger with heating multiple buildings in the vicinity of each other with a district heating system. Or you can get even larger with a heat only system where you're using the heat to make steam and use it in a type of industrial process. The picture there is a boiler, a hog fuel boiler that's producing steam for a pelletizing plant for alfalfa and wood. Then on the electricity side, there's also a range of scales. On the smaller side, you can do net metering electricity or combined heat and power, where you're just offsetting the electricity load at the facility where the technology is located. Or it can be quite large with a power plant. Even a power plant can be small, 1 or 2 megawatts, or in some places in the world, there are biomass power plants that are a couple of 100 megawatts. So quite a very large range. What we're talking about here for South Tahoe Refuse is a net metered combined heat and power. So really at that smaller end of the scale of technologies. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in the next slide. Please go ahead and advance. So what's being proposed for STR is a small scale net metered CHP combined heat and power gasifier technology. So because it will be net metering, that means it will be offsetting electricity and natural gas that's used on site at the facility. There will be no power sales to the grid. It's not a power plant. As a gasifier technology, this is a system that can produce energy 24/7, which in the context of what's happening in the region in California, we think is important to point out. It makes this type of technology very useful as an energy resilience tool for those where electricity needs to be on, and even when the grid goes down. As a gasifier technology, the system bakes woody material. It's not a direct combustion technology. Our initial estimates suggest that a single unit, which is 125 kilowatts, will offset over 100% of the grid electricity at that site that STR uses, and over 90% of the natural gas that they use on an annual basis. And there's quite a number of other folks in the area that are pursuing these types of smaller scale systems. Just as some examples there in the list in the red, there's North Star Community Services District in Placer County is pursuing a district energy plant. Wisewood is working with Mount Bachelor Ski Resort up in Oregon to break ground this year on a district heating system using biomass in Central Oregon. North Fork, California is, I believe they will be operating here soon, a small 2 megawatt power plant, so a little bit bigger. And we're also working with folks down in Tuolumne County on a similarly sized system that's 125 kilowatt combined heat and power that will be supporting an integrated wood yard. So there's definitely a lot of interest in these smaller scale technologies. And there's plenty that are already installed and operating around the world. The images at the bottom from left to right are just some examples of that. There's a gasifier system in Italy on the left. In the middle is a small scale combined heat and power system in Plumas County, California, in Quincy. Then the gentleman walking towards the cement building is another gasifier system in Italy that's serving a meat processing facility. And then on the right is a very nice looking district heating system in Austria that's at a ski resort community. Please advance the slide. So Wisewood has worked with STR and TRPA staff to conduct an initial environmental and safety impact assessment. There's still more design to do on this system. So this is really just an initial assessment to get a sense of what the environmental and safety impacts might be to inform this process of how we could help this project move forward. So we'll hit on some of the main topics here in the next few slides. Go ahead and move on. So in terms of fuel demand, STR currently receives and processes about 10,000 tons of woody material each year. You can see an image of what that looks like currently at their facility. That material is coming from defensible space and fire mitigation thinning operations in the community, green yard debris, and also clean construction and demolition material. Based on the information that STR gave us, that the material they're receiving is trending upwards. And it's no surprise as there's increasingly more encouragement for folks to do more of that defensible thinning, especially after the Caldor fire. So the graph is showing data that we got over the last few years. In blue is the annual total of tons they've been receiving and processing. In green is the through June. We were able to get 2022 data through June. So you can see that it's an increasing trend. 2022 is set to increase what they have gotten the last few years. The system that's being proposed for STR that would offset most of their energy is going to use about 1,000 tons per year. So that's only about 10% of what they're currently taking in and processing. And the little box in red, given again the context of this region, we thought it was important to note that the system is not expected to incentivize new fuel reduction treatments because it will be using just a portion of the material that's already coming to STR. But we do think that it could contribute to more of a community discussion about these types of small scale systems and how they might add value to trying to encourage that type of defensible space activity. Please advance. STR is currently transporting this chipped material out of the basin for disposal as compost, about 50 miles round trip. And you can see in the graph, we've got a column with no action, so business as usual. And then if the gasifier were installed at the site. So you can see average trips per year, the miles per year, and then associated emissions with that transportation. And the system will only use a portion of the material that they're already receiving. And so it's not a significant decrease, but it's in every count decreasing what is already occurring. So we estimated that the gasifier system will reduce truck traffic by about 72 trucks per year, reduce miles driven by about 3,600 miles per year round trip, and then reduce the associated emissions and truck noise and safety concerns with that transportation. And advance to the next slide, please. For air quality, we did some initial estimates of the criteria pollutants of the facility. Gasifiers have very low emission rates, and there may be a potential offset required for NOx. You can see at the table at the bottom are some criteria pollutants, and the expected plant emissions are far below all of the emission thresholds with the exception of NOx. It's a little bit higher there. So that's something we would want to look at in additional analysis. There'll be no visible smoke during normal operations. The image shows that gasifier system is actually a little bit bigger than the one proposed for STR at the meat processing facility in Italy, and it's running at full blast in that picture, and there's no visible smoke. Again, this is, we like to mention these gasifier systems as an energy resilience tool because they can be an always on option, similar to how diesel generators would be used. That's not the case for STR, but just as a reference, a biomass generator has much lower emissions when compared to a similarly sized diesel generator. You can see that in the graph at the bottom. And as mentioned, we may need to do some additional emissions as we move, if we're able to move forward with the project, just to confirm some of these estimates. And you can move on. So in summary, the project being proposed for STR will use waste woody material that's already being collected and processed by STR. It will decrease the number of waste hauling trucks that are traveling out of the area and the associated impacts of that transportation. It will have minimal emissions and no visible smoke during normal operations. It requires no increase to the current property footprint and can be located adjacent to existing facilities. We estimate it will have similar noise levels as current operations. And then thinking again, a little bit bigger picture, we think it will represent a type of distributed renewable energy system that, because it's able to offset energy on site and not sell power to the grid, will really be a pilot for the community that is something to consider to help meet local goals for 100% 24/7 renewable energy, which is a quite tougher goal to meet than just offsetting your annual energy usage with renewable energy. So if this project is approved, we expect the next steps would be, if it's approved to move forward, we would expect the next steps to be to complete more detailed analysis and design, so we can hone in on the definition of what the system will really look like and what what the emissions analysis and so forth will be, and then submit a permit application to TRPA and the other required regulatory jurisdictions to move forward. That's it that I have, and I'll be here for questions. And I believe my colleague Andrew Hayden is also available for more technical questions that might come up.
Thank you, Megan. Next slide,
Thank
please, Tracy. So in terms of next steps, staff feel the information that has been provided in the staff report by Wisewood Energy and South Tahoe Refuse is sufficient to allow TRPA to accept an application for review. And hence you'll see a motion for the Forest Health and Wildfire Committee to recommend the TRPA Governing Board direct the Executive Director to accept an application for review once received. Likely, if this is to move forward, a submitted application would come to the TRPA Governing Board for final review and or approval or denial in late 2023. I do want to note that staff is partnering with the Tahoe Conservancy. There's an opportunity to look more regionally at biomass utilization within the Tahoe Basin, energy resilience, and potentially using this type of technology in other areas with critical infrastructure that needs to be maintained when power grids go out. So with that, next slide. I will open it back up for member comments and questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat. And I'm going to ask our committee members if they have any questions or comments in just a moment. I do have a question of Ms. Hartman. Ms. Hartman, I'm interested in the fact that we have 3 California counties that either have a facility like this online or that are in the getting permits. And those are Plumas, Tuolumne, and Placer County. And of course, Placer is one of our constituent counties here in the basin. Now, I understand that Plumas is online and functioning, and the other 2 are in some area prior to final approvals. But what I'm interested in knowing is, first on the Plumas facility, how long has it been functioning? What's their track record been in terms of safety? And well, specifically safety. Let's address that first.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'll probably pass over to Andrew, who's more in touch with the operators there. But I do want to note that you're right, the Plumas facility is the one that is currently operating. And it was installed, I believe, in 2016. And it's actually a slightly different technology than what's being proposed for STR. It's a boiler with an organic ranking cycle. Whereas what's proposed for STR is a gasifier. So it is a different technology, but similar scale. Andrew, do you want to jump in on the operations of that system?
Sure, yeah. So as Megan said, it was commissioned in 2016. It's been operating since then. It is small, similar in scale, but a different technology, as Megan mentioned, and it is has not had any major issues. They operate it about 5 months of the year, maybe when it's cold. So they had a ground source heat pump that was malfunctioning. So it works through the fall, but then when it gets cold, the ground loop freezes up. So this heating system or CHP system is offsetting that, essentially taking over during the winter months. And it, I think it doesn't have any visible smoke, so it's not anything that people are noticing in terms of safety. It's had no safety problems that I can point to.
I have a follow-up question that goes more to the environmental capability or compatibility of these existing units. I understand Plumas is a different technology. First of all, with regards to the pending applications for Tuolumne and Placer counties, are they the similar type technology or different? And then I have a question about their compliance with environmental standards. But are basically of those two, Tuolumne and Placer, are they similar to what is proposed here for South Lake Tahoe?
Yes, so Tuolumne is essentially identical, so it would be the exact same system. They have gone through a permitting process and have received their permit, so they are starting construction and final designs, and right, essentially as we speak, they're getting that moving. The Placer, we're not involved, so I don't know if we're talking about North Fork or which project the Placer project is, but I couldn't tell you if it's the same tech. It wouldn't be the same technology that we're proposing, but it may be similar. I'm not sure.
North Fork, we're not involved in the North Fork project or the Placer County, the North Star Community District services, but the North Star Community District is, we think it's a boiler. I think it's a boiler system.
It is a boiler, though.
Yeah.
If it's North Star. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's more similar to the Plumas project. But as Andrew said, the Tuolumne one is about identical to what's being proposed for STR.
Well then, and where is Tuolumne in their process? Do they have a permit at this point?
Yes, we participated in their permitting process with their environmental consultants about 3 months ago, and as far as I know, they were approved. So
again, and I'm a layman in this area, so excuse my general questions, but have they satisfied the California and federal standards necessary for that facility in Tuolumne County?
I would have to get back to you, but I believe so. There was 2 rounds of environmental permitting. One was without air modeling, and then they came back and did air modeling, and were considered a non-significant source, because it is also small. Yeah.
So then we can assume that they've satisfied national and California standards for these facilities, these types of facilities.
I think so, and we can follow up, but yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it now to other committee members. First, Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I did want to go back to page 124 of the packet. I'm not sure which slide it was, that NOx number. I'm just wondering, so in the packet, it does say there are potentially ways to offset that NOx. I'm just wondering, have we looked at that? Can we look at that more, the selective catalytic reduction to reduce that? Because that appears, at least on paper, to be fairly high in comparison to what's going on now. And then I guess as a follow-up question, has there been any modeling as to whether the truck routes that are eliminated help bring that number down?
I can address the modeling in terms of the truck routes. We, as I mentioned, this was really just an initial assessment, knowing that there would be potentially need to do a deeper analysis down the road. So we haven't compared, for example, the reduction of truck traffic compared to the facility operations compared to existing natural gas. So we haven't done the deeper level of analysis. If that would be helpful, it's something we can consider in the next phase. And Andrew, do you want to talk about the controls?
Yeah, so the first stage of NOx reduction is the selective non-catalytic reduction technology. So that's, I believe, is that modeled here, Megan, or I'm not sure?
I
if
don't
it
think
is,
so.
but
I think we
is-
did
yeah,
without controls. Yeah.
without, okay. So then the next step would be to add that, which would reduce the NOx by half. And then if that's not sufficient, then there are other aftermarket technologies that could be placed on the equipment to lower it further. So it's a, depending upon what the modeling shows, if the reduction by half is not sufficient, then we could look at another level of reduction.
Thank you. I would certainly like to see that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do any other committee members present in the room have any questions or comments? If not, then do we have, I don't see any hands raised by our other members, but are there any questions?
Yeah, I think your vice chair has her hand raised and I have my hand raised as well, Mr. Hicks.
Well, Brooke, why don't you go first since you're on screen?
Okay, thank you. This is really exciting. I'm totally supportive of this project. I'm slightly disappointed that we have so much woody material and we're only, putting a very small dent in it, 10%, and only a 10% reduction in vehicle miles, et cetera. And I'm wondering, did South Tahoe Refuse consider, I know that this meets their needs in that it offsets their energy costs, but I'm wondering if something bigger that would use more biofuel and could be used in other aspects of the community, if that was considered.
Yeah, I can comment to part of that, and I wonder if Kat might want to jump in also just about the regional considerations. But when it comes to net metering, there are rules around sizing the equipment to serve the load. So you can't really produce much more than they need without then becoming a power plant, where you would have to have a PPA with, in this case, Liberty, which can be quite complicated and lengthy, and permitting becomes much different, and it can be a much more difficult project overall, as we've seen in this region and elsewhere. That said, there certainly are other applications, as I mentioned with the scale. This system could be applied to many different facilities in theory in the region. So you certainly could have multiple of these smaller scale systems to try to use more of that material that are all appropriately scaled with low emissions and more straightforward operations and permitting and so forth. That's certainly an option. STR is not the only application in the region where this could be applied. But of course, with the current ban on biomass, we found that the option to go forward would be to look at one right now and to see what that might open up in terms of a community discussion about others. But there's trade-offs in different sizes of applications for sure.
Makes sense. And you mentioned in the report in a couple different places with regards to the 100% renewable goal that the city of South Lake Tahoe has to try to be there by 2030. So I could definitely see and would want to start talking in the community about just what you said, other of these smaller biomass systems. For example, for City Hall, it's out at the airport, so there's plenty of space. What does something like this system cost?
This is Andrew. So the raw equipment, in sort of a containerized version, is right around $2 million. And then there's additional costs to integrate and site. And if you want to put one in a building, there's those costs and so forth. And then there's the additional cost of distribution of the heat and the power. So it's going to be case by case specific, but the core equipment machinery is right around 2 million.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add one thing, and Kat, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason why it was sized the way it is because of the woody material stream that is coming into the STR facility. So it's sized according to what they already accept, not to be a general biomass, to accept general biomass from the public. Is that, Kat?
Correct, yeah.
Thanks.
Actually, it's not quite, it's not that it's sized to the amount of material they received, it's sized to their energy usage. And that's why it's only 10% of the material that they take in.
Thank you.
Ashley, did you have some comments or questions?
I did. So we received well, first of all, thanks for the presentation, and it's exciting to see these small scale facilities coming to life. I just had a question. We received a bunch of public comment. One in particular was noting that the site, essentially adding more emissions to the existing site, would overly burden adjacent communities. And so I just wanted to ask about the conversations you've had or the discussions you've had with the communities immediately adjacent to the existing facility, if those have happened at all, and if so, generally speaking, how those residents feel about, adding more infrastructure to the existing site.
On my part, on Wisewood's part, we have not engaged with the community at large in that area. We've really focused on first getting this in front of TRPA and making sure there was a pathway based on this initial assessment. I don't know if anybody from STR in the room wants to make any comments beyond that.
And then maybe I would ask Kat that question, if TRPA staff have engaged at all or heard more directly, other than the public comments we received, about, like I said, the most immediately impacted communities around the existing facility.
Hello, I'm John Marchini with South Tahoe Refuse. To answer the previous question, no, we've not reached out to our neighbors. We have not started that due diligence, and mainly because we kind of wanted to walk through this process. Once approval is granted, then we will absolutely go through that due diligence. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with that word today.
And this is Kat McIntyre, and it's essentially the same. We have not specifically engaged with the neighboring people in the community. However, if this were to go forward, that is on the top of the list. And I will say, while we have not engaged with community members in that area, we have engaged with other stakeholder groups like the League to Save Lake Tahoe, like the City of South Lake Tahoe, to get, opinions and thoughts on this potential path forward. So indirectly through those other stakeholder groups in the community.
Okay, it would be great to just get a sense of the potentially impacted community, right? Their proximity, essentially how far they are from these potentially increased NOx emissions. And also just to know, is that basin already in compliance or out of compliance when it comes to NOx emissions? Just more of those details would be incredibly helpful. And I think also doing that outreach directly to the communities versus the advocacy groups would be very telling about how much or how little the local residents know about the facility, and they may end up being in favor of it. But I do think we need to hear more from the immediately impacted communities.
This is John Marshall again, just to reemphasize, all that you're deciding today is whether or not the agency should accept or lift this suspension to accept an application. And that all those processes can occur and should occur once that if there's a decision to move forward with the actual project application.
Yes, I understand that. I think the public comments though made it clear to me that that hasn't been messaged in a way that the public understands necessarily, that this is what this decision about is about the application versus this specific site. So I think, just essentially as we move forward with this, really being clear about what's being proposed, how this impacts, again, the basin as a whole in this immediate community. It's on the site of a refuse facility that traditionally has sat within disadvantaged communities around this state, around California, and other states, right? That's just been the way that we've cited these facilities in the US. And I just think we have to do a good job of really being clear about what we're adding to the community, that this decision is distinct, but that it could lead to this other siting decision down the road. So I just want us to be very clear, especially given those comments.
Thank you, Ashley. The other members of the committee are Cody Bass and Wes Rice.
Yes.
Yes, Cody.
This
Is that you, Cody?
Bass.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, this
Yes.
is me. And so, yeah, I agree a lot with Ms. Lane's comments as well as with Ashley's comments. And I just want to say the city is absolutely in support of this project. I think for, our climate goals as well as for just the defensible space and what we need to accomplish with our defensible space needs within the basin. I couldn't agree more that we need to identify other sites as we move forward. And I think, with regards to Ashley's comments in the community, I think the city really, for this individual project, needs to take that on as we know that we have the approval and can move forward. I think the city can be the kind of lead in really the public outreach to these immediate, neighbors and that area of town, which is really an industrial area of the city. And, there are going to be some affected neighbors, but I think that, I think we can get support for this because of the needs of defensible space and as well as our climate change goals. So I'm very much in support of the whole. Thank you.
Wes, do you have any comments?
I do. I had my hand raised, but my question was answered by council. We're simply lifting the ban on accepting the application. We're not approving anything other than saying, okay, go ahead and make your application and then we'll go from there. So I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes, and thank you, Ashley and Wes and all of you. I think that's, again, should be stressed. We're not being asked to approve the permitting of this facility in South Lake Tahoe at this time. The question in front of us today is simply whether an application can be accepted or received by the agency. And, our standard on that, and John, I'm going to ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, but the relevant provision as I see it, and it was quoted in our materials, chapter 65.1.f, dealing with biofuel facilities, says TRPA shall suspend acceptance of applications for biofuel facilities until further research demonstrates the safety and environmental compatibility of such facilities. So that's our standard. That's the question today, as I understand it. Have the applicants here or the presenters demonstrated the safety and environmental compatibility of such facilities? Is that correct?
Well, let me answer it this way. That is your ultimate decision as to, it's not,
Right.
staff's decision. It's our recommendation from staff that that finding can be made, but it's even a little more narrow than you articulated. It's not that all applications, but whether or not this particular facility, sized as it is and located as it is, and given the potential offset of transportation emissions, has it been demonstrated that you all believe that it's a good idea to basically lift the suspension and accept one application for this particular project proposal, given everything that you've heard? And again, from the staff report, staff, the executive director and on down recommend that there has been sufficient evidence presented to make that finding.
Thank you. So assuming we make that finding, then, and yes, it goes to this project only. That's correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and then assuming our committee makes that recommendation and assuming the board accepts it and the application is accepted, then again, just to be clear for the public, that goes through our regular process and ultimately before any approvals are given by the agency of that application or of that project, we have a whole slew of opportunities of public hearings and meetings and opportunities to express opinions and objections.
Correct.
Okay, so we're not prohibiting anybody now from speaking as to the project, but it's just a question that we need to know exactly what the project involves so that we can tee it up correctly with full information. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the public comment in just a minute, but I do have a sort of my own comment on it. I was on the Bi-State Fire Commission following the Angora fire. And one of the recommendations of that commission was that these biomass facilities be seriously considered because of the necessity of removing, the forest clearing that we need to do and removing the materials. And of course, at the time they talked about the facility that was pending in Carson City, which was ultimately built, but I guess it wasn't financially successful. There were other proposals that came up over the years, and I understand that back in 2012, when I wasn't here, but I know Shelley Aldine was, and some of our staff members were, that's when this suspension was put in place. Again, I think, well, number one, I think that these biomass facilities are important. They're necessary. We have a severe problem of what to do with the waste when we get it. Trucking it down out of the basin is not necessarily a safe alternative. Yes, and I guess it's not even a clear environmental alternative given the noxious fumes of the trucks and everything else. So I think getting back to where we are on this particular section, the language doesn't prohibit the acceptance of any application. It's not necessarily even a moratorium, it's a suspension. So I think our question today is, as I stated, I think our question is, are we satisfied that there has been a sufficient showing to lift this suspension, to unsuspend the suspension as to this particular project so that we can take that next step? I was very impressed over the fact that these other facilities, particularly the one in Plumas, which is already online, and yes, it's not in the basin, and Tuolumne and the Placer County facilities are not in the basin. But the fact that they've gone through the permitting processes of federal and California, and that's what I believe, what we need to see done. We need to do our own review and look at it under our own standards, but that CEQA and process is critical to this. And I think that that's something we will look at very closely. But as I understand it, the project sort of needs a green light to go forward to get that. And I can understand that. So, that's how I see it. With those comments made, I'd like to open it now to public comment. And Maria, are there any hands raised? Anyone in the audience first?
Actually,
Yes.
but do you mind if I make one more comment just before we go to public comment?
No, go right ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, so thanks for all these clarifications. And I guess I just want to make it clear to the public there that, as stated, we are really just determining if we can even go forward with a bigger proposal for this, and that we will be looking for a lot more information on the site on mitigation. Essentially, if we go through a full proposal, we'll be looking for a lot more information on this and weighing all of these discussions that we've talked about today, right? There are climate benefits, there are benefits for mitigating Wildfire by not allowing open pile burning and moving those materials to facilities. So I just essentially want to reassure the public that if we go forward with the decision to allow this permit to go forward, we'll obviously have more conversation with all of you and really hear your feedback and make sure that any of these proposed facilities are improving the environment. So thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. At this point, is there anyone in the audience? And I see one hand raised. If you'll come to the podium, please. And again, we have a 3-minute limitation on public comments, and we would appreciate it if you stick to that time limit.
Thank you, Ellie
Yes.
Waller. I wasn't going to address this, but I did read and reread the staff report. And I lived in Placer County at the time of the Kings Beach proposal. And it wasn't that the public, my opinion, that came forward were against a biomass facility, which would have gone through CEQA and everything. It was about the location of an elementary school and a boys club. Location is an essential component. And when the applicant, if this goes forward today, comes forward, should really have alternative sites. There are some issues now that I live in Douglas County with a sawmill on Indian land, and we had no choice. So again, I'm always concerned as a member of the public, the local nexus. I'm really glad we had an open dialogue today about encouraging more public outreach from all areas. I'm always appreciative of that. The other piece is in the studies of Kings Beach, when we were going through that, Loyalton biomass, is in and out of financial trouble with it. And so my questions here is, when this comes forward, some of the financial feasibility of the cost sharing with the one at Cabin Creek, the negotiations with Liberty went south because of cost negotiations. And at one time, there was a proposal to go to the taxpayers. So there's lots more information. I think you're coming forward today. I want to thank you, Board Member Hicks, for re-massaging the language that maybe when you make the motion, it needs to be very specific that you're lifting a suspension for one application. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other persons in the audience who wish to make comment? If not, we'll turn to the virtual comments. Maria, is there any hands raised?
Mr. Chair, we have several hands raised online to comment. First hand up is Steve Teixeira. Steve, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Steve Teixeira, for the record, and I'm speaking this morning to you on behalf of both the Tahoe Chamber and on behalf of my own company, Sustainable Community Advocates. I think the record that's presented in the staff report, that was the presentation given to you this morning, and your conversations and discussions as members of this committee do allow you to take the action that is recommended by staff to move forward to allow the application in question today to be submitted to the TRPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the next hand raised is Norma Santiago. Norma, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee on this topic. I'm Norma Santiago, for the record, representing the South Fork of the American River Collaborative, as well as the within the collaborative, our biomass working group, speaking in support of the lifting of the suspension for the permitting process so that this project can move forward. Just so that you know, so far is working also with El Dorado County, looking at these kinds of projects throughout El Dorado County and creating these microgrids. We have had a lot of great success in our discussions with Wisewood Energy, and would like to see this move forward. And also to let you know that I was also a member of the TRPA governing board when the ban happened in 2012. So there were some very specific things that we were looking at when the ban happened. And now that there's changes in the technology, there's all kinds of other aspects here. it's worthy of STR obtaining a permit to further evaluate this and then bring it through the public process to address those concerns that were discussed earlier. Additionally, to Miss Lane's comment, the county is working with Wisewood and looking very closely at this project to see about the possibility of having in the future maybe a unit in some of its facilities as well. So as Miss Lane mentioned and Mr. Bass mentioned, this is also an opportunity to look at something future as we start building a microgrid and looking at renewable energy utilizing this biomass material in the future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. That was very interesting. And I was not aware that you were a member of the governing board in 2012 when this was passed. Thank you. Next, Norma.
The next hand raised is Alan Miller. Alan, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Board members. Alan Miller, 30-year basin resident, 25 years of that spent working with the water board over at Lahontan. And you have my comments for the record. I stand on those comments. I haven't really heard very much here today to address the primary comment, which I had, which is that I think that TRPA needs to devote its attentions more to policy development if they want to promote these kinds of pilot projects, so-called, and small facilities, boutique, sorts of setups. But I'm not really hearing anything is being done about that or what the plans are. Nothing's been put forward. So, you're a planning agency. You're supposed to have a plan, not just piecemeal these things through. And that's the primary objection I have. I don't necessarily object to biomass facilities in general. I don't know that they're the right solution for the basin. Well, that remains to be seen. I don't think the research has been done. The prohibition or the suspension of applications was intended to promote additional research on the behalf of TRPA in consortium with others, not just, basically buying into a sales pitch by one company for this particular STR facility, which is fine. I think, they've made an adequate pitch, but I think it's a cart before the horse, and needs to be some planning. So I would recommend that the board would adopt, would put forward an amendment that would allow exceptions for certain types of facilities based on actual research that is done. And by research, I mean serious scientific inquiry into alternatives and different types of technologies and comparisons and those sorts of things. I mean, that's what engineering is about. That's what, environmental management is about, not just piecemealing through until, all of a sudden, the claim is that we can just do this one. And then, no, others will come forward. We've heard that this board and others want to encourage that. And so, again, I encourage that too, but under a proper planning framework, which is scientifically and technically supported, and not just piecemealing as you go. And then also with greater public involvement. So a chance for people to come out and say, well, it's not going to be just in this one place. It's going to be over at the community college and the airport, and it's going to be at the refuse site, and it's going to be here and there in the North Shore. And, again, I just appeal you to slow down. Just, there's no reason to rush this ahead.
Miller, if you'd wrap up, please. If you would please wrap up.
That's the gist of my comments. I'm mainly here if anybody has any questions about the comments I submitted for the record. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Maria, anyone else?
Yes, we have 3 more hands raised at this time, Mr. Chair. Next hand up is John Friedrich. If you unmute, John, you can address the committee. John, if you'd like to comment, you can unmute your microphone to address this committee. Okay, we'll circle back to John. Next hand is Nick Spiel. Nick, if you unmute your microphone, you can address the committee.
Hello, my name is Nick Spiel and I live in South Lake Tahoe. Thank you for considering this application to allow a biomass facility and for taking action to mitigate the risks of wildfire and climate change. I'd like to encourage the TRPA to more broadly suspend the limitation on biomass facilities to encourage other entities to submit applications to develop biomass facilities. These applications will be evaluated at length, of course, but they should be allowed to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Maria?
Next hand raised is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute your microphone, you can address the committee.
Thank you, committee members. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. We certainly support any efforts to curtail any sort of burning in the Lake Tahoe Basin that continues to add phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon black to the lake. This is a complicated issue. I thought that the presentation today was woefully lacking in data to allow this committee to make their decision. However, if the committee does go forward with this approval, I would hope there would be some way to ensure that this particular project, at least under application, and I think the staff could do this, make sure that they've come forward with at least an EA, an environmental assessment, and not the armchair initial environmental checklist that the TRPA often uses to allow these projects to go forward. But I am quite concerned about the cumulative impacts eventually. For all those that think that there's going to be one biomass facility after another until technology improves, you know, with regard to the emissions, I don't think that's going to happen. But we do have to look at these options, I think, and consider them one by one. And in that respect, I would say that I would just caution everyone to thoroughly vet the environmental impacts under at least an EA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty. Any other, Maria?
We'll circle back to John Friedrich. John, your hand is up. If you'd like to address the committee, you can unmute your microphone. Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment.
Thank you. And I'm aware, it's too bad that John had a problem there, but you know, he's been a proponent for this project since it was presented to us last year, and I presume that his comment would have been positive. With that said, do any members of the committee have any other comments or questions before we proceed? Okay, if not, oh, and we have to close public comment. Public comment is closed. And no further comments then from committee members. If not, I'm ready to entertain a motion on this item. In order for the motion to pass, an affirmative vote of a majority of the quorum present is required. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend the governing board direct the executive director to accept an application from South Tahoe Refuse for an on-site small biomass project at its collection facility.
I'll second.
We have a motion. Any discussion by the committee? Any comments or questions? Then Maria, would you please conduct a roll call vote for us?
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you very much. We are now on agenda item number 5, committee member comments. Do any of our committee members have any further comments they wish to make to the committee? Maria, any hands raised?
There are no online committee member hands raised.
All right, then that takes us to our final matter of business, which is general public interest comment period. If any member of the public wishes to address the Forest Health and Wildfire Committee at this time, please raise your hand either now in person or by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Are there anybody in the audience wish to make final comments? Maria, do we have any members of the public raising hands?
Mr. Chair, John Friedrichs has his hand back up. John, if you check your audio settings, the up arrow next to your microphone. You're unmuted on my end. I see your microphone.
All right, trying
Yes.
again, third time's a charm. Hey, guys, you can hear me now?
Yes, we can
Okay.
hear you.
All right, yeah, sorry, technical difficulties traveling today and hence wasn't able to participate. I'm glad Mr. Bass was. And I just wanted just to say that for the members of the public concerned about biomass or wanting to explore this topic further, I'd be happy to have those conversations. I just wanted to add that with the city, it really helps us to move towards achieving our 100% renewable 24/7 goal. I mean, you either to have renewables at night, you need a source of that, which can't be achieved generally with solar. So biomass is a substitution for gas, which is a climate change provoking heat trapping gas. So this is part of the climate solution. It's part of the forest health solution. So in that sense, to me, it's a real win-win. The technology has advanced a lot in the last 10 years. So creating renewable clean energy rather than pile burning or having more Caldor fires is clearly a step in the right direction. And yes, so I look forward to exploring this technology. I'm grateful that the committee gave its affirmation to move ahead. And again, I think this is a right solution for this time, or at least to explore this solution, and would welcome any members of the public that want to kind of look at this in more depth to get a hold of me or other committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, John. If there are no other comments by committee members, then is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned at 11:20 a.m.